money can't buy happiness. Carter Holden Reynolds had heard that phrase 1,000 times, dismissed it as something poor people told themselves to feel better about their circumstances. Tonight, sitting alone in a half-empty diner on Christmas Eve, staring at a $45 steak he couldn't bring himself to eat, he understood the words carried a truth his $200 million had never taught him. The diner was small, tucked between a laundromat and a bodega in a neighborhood Carter hadn't visited in 15 years. He'd chosen it deliberately, driven by some impulse he couldn't name, some need to return to the place where he'd eaten ramen as a broke MIT student dreaming of the empire he'd one day build. Reynolds Tech existed now, software that powered half the healthcare systems in North America, a valuation that made investors salivate and board members demand quarterly growth that bordered on impossible. He'd built everything he'd imagined and more. The emptiness felt like a physical weight in his chest. His phone sat face down on the red checkered tablecloth. He'd tried calling an hour ago, heard his ex-wife Rebecca's clipped voice explaining that Madison was busy decorating gingerbread cookies with Mark. Mark, who lived in the house Carter's child support payments funded. Mark, who got to see his daughter's face every morning over breakfast while Carter scheduled video calls like business meetings, fighting for scraps of attention from a 5-year-old who increasingly seemed to forget what her father's voice sounded like. The call had lasted 43 seconds. He'd counted. Maddie's excitement had bubbled through the speaker, all energy and joy about the cookies, about Mark's funny voices, about how they were going to drive around looking at Christmas lights after dinner. She'd said she loved him before hanging up. The words rushed and automatic, already moving on to the next moment, the next person who was actually present in her life. Carter pushed the steak around his plate. The wine he'd ordered sat untouched, an $80 bottle that felt obscene now, wasteful in a way his younger self would have understood instantly. 3 other tables held customers, their quiet conversations floating through the warm air. A couple in the corner holding hands across the table. 2 men who looked like construction workers laughing about something one of them had done at a job site. An elderly woman eating soup, reading a paperback novel with bent corners and a cracked spine. Everyone had somewhere to be after this, someone waiting. His phone buzzed. Thomas Brennan Sullivan, his CFO, and the closest thing Carter had to a best friend, checking in with the kind of persistence that came from watching someone spiral for 2 years straight. The text was simple: bro, you can't spend Christmas alone again. Come to our house. 7 people, chaos, but your family. Carter typed back, need to clear my head, but thanks. Brennan's response came immediately. Then at least eat something. You look like death. The concern was real, earned through years of late nights building the company from nothing, through the divorce that had nearly destroyed Carter's ability to function, through the custody battle that had ended with his daughter 900 miles away, and a visitation schedule that felt like prison terms marked on a calendar. Brennan had 3 kids, a wife who laughed easily, a house that smelled like cookies and chaos. He understood what Carter had lost because he lived what Carter wanted. The door opened, bringing a gust of December cold that made the other diners look up. Carter barely noticed, lost in the familiar loop of thoughts that had defined the past week. Tomorrow was Christmas. Maddie would open presents from Mark, from Rebecca's parents who'd never approved of Carter's obsession with work, from the new family that had formed in the space his absence created. He'd shipped gifts weeks ago, carefully chosen items that cost too much and meant too little, compensating with price tags for the presents he couldn't provide. His therapist called it the pattern. Throwing money at problems, believing resources equaled solutions, confusing provision with connection. Carter knew the diagnosis was accurate and had no idea how to change the fundamental wiring that made him see the world through spreadsheets and strategic planning. When Rebecca had asked for more time together, he'd hired a housekeeper to free up her schedule. When she'd said she felt lonely, he'd bought the vacation home on Martha's Vineyard. Every complaint met with a purchase, every need answered with his checkbook, until the day she'd told him she was in love with someone else. Someone who remembered to ask about her day and actually listened to the answer. The steak had gone cold. Carter signed the check without looking at the total, left a tip that would make the waitresses weak, and prepared to return to the penthouse that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. Then he heard the voice, a woman at the counter, her back to him, speaking softly to the elderly waitress Carter now recognized as Mrs. Patterson, the owner who'd let him run a tab when he was 22 and eating twice a week on borrowed money. The woman was younger than Mrs. Patterson by decades, thin, in a way that spoke of missed meals rather than gym memberships, wearing a coat that looked worn even from across the room. Next to her stood a little girl, blonde hair pulled into a ponytail that had seen better days, light-up sneakers that blinked red with each small movement. The child was maybe 5 years old, standing on her tiptoes to see the menu board mounted on the wall behind the counter. The woman was counting coins. Carter watched her spread them across the counter's surface, quarters and dimes and nickels arranged in small piles, while her lips moved with silent arithmetic. Mrs. Patterson stood patient and kind, making no move to rush the process. The little girl watched her mother with enormous eyes that held something Carter recognized instantly, a hope so fragile it hurt to witness. The woman's hands shook slightly as she gathered the coins back into her palm, counting again as if the total might change through sheer force of will. Her voice, when she finally spoke, carried the weight of a decision that mattered for too much. "Can we get the spaghetti, Mrs.?" Patterson's expression softened with practiced sympathy. "The spaghetti is $8.95, honey." The woman closed her eyes for just a second, doing math that clearly didn't work in her favor. "The soup is $6.50, Mrs. Patterson nodded. "And milk for her." $2. The little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Are we having dinner here, Mommy? Like a real restaurant?" The question landed like a punch. Carter's hand froze halfway to his water glass. He'd eaten in restaurants since before he could remember, never once considering the act as something special. Something that required hope and careful budgeting and the courage to walk through a door knowing you might not have enough. The woman forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Only if we have enough money, sweetie." Carter looked at his abandoned steak, at the wine he'd ordered without checking the price, at the leather wallet resting on the table next to his phone. He thought about Maddie, about the last time she'd asked him for something simple and he'd been too distracted to notice. He thought about his daughter 900 miles away, eating cookies with another man while he sat alone in a diner counting his mistakes. The little girl's face fell with the particular devastation of childhood disappointment, quick and complete. Her mother was still counting, still hoping the numbers would somehow rearrange themselves into enough. Carter stood before he'd fully decided to move. The walk to the counter felt longer than it should have, his brain catching up to his body's decision. The woman had her back to him, shoulders tight with the tension of someone who'd learned not to expect kindness from strangers. The little girl saw him first, those enormous blue eyes tracking his approach with curiosity rather than fear. "Excuse me." The woman spun fast, instinct pulling her daughter closer in a movement that spoke of hard lessons learned. Carter raised both hands slightly, a gesture of peace he'd seen in dozens of business negotiations, but never needed in a diner. "I'm sorry to intrude." His voice came out gentler than he'd intended. "I'm having dinner alone over there." He gestured toward his table with its abandoned steak. "It's Christmas Eve. Nobody should eat alone on Christmas, right? Would you two like to join me?" The woman blinked several times, her face cycling through confusion and suspicion before landing on something that looked like embarrassment. What?" Carter felt the weight of his expensive watch, his tailored shirt under the casual jacket, all the markers of wealth he usually wore without thought. "I ordered too much food, and honestly, you'd be doing me a favor. Christmas alone is—" He let the sentence trail off, the admission more honest than he'd planned. The woman opened her mouth, closed it again. She looked at the coins in her hand, at the menu board, at Mrs. Patterson, who was watching the exchange with interest. "I can't accept. We're fine. Thank you, but—" She started to turn away, pulling her daughter toward the door. The little girl dragged her feet, creating resistance that made the woman stop. Mommy, please. The child's voice carried the particular pleading tone that parents worldwide recognized. He looks nice. Carter crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening. He thought about Maddie, about how she could read people with the uncomplicated honesty of children who hadn't learned to hide their observations. What's your name, Sophie? The girl's face brightened with the attention. And this is my mom, Rachel. Rachel. The name fit the tired but pretty face, the brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, the dark circles under eyes that had probably seen too many early mornings and late nights. Nice to meet you both. I'm Carter. He stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. Look, I know this seems strange, but I genuinely ordered too much food, and it would be nice to have company. You'd actually be doing me a favor. Something in his voice must have registered as truthful because Rachel's grip on her daughter loosened fractionally. She looked at Sophie's hopeful face, at the coin still clutched in her hand, at Carter's expression, which he kept carefully neutral. The internal war played out across her features. Pride versus necessity, distrust versus exhaustion, the possibility of accepting help from a stranger against the reality of her daughter's hunger. Please, Mommy. Sophie's whisper cut through the silence. Rachel's exhale came out shaky. Okay, but just this once. And thank you. Carter's relief surprised him with its intensity. He motioned toward his table, pulling out chairs before they arrived, helping Sophie climb into a booster seat while Rachel settled beside her daughter with the careful movements of someone expecting the offer to be rescinded at any moment. Mrs. Patterson appeared with menus, but Carter waved her off. The daily special for both of them, please, and orange juice for the young lady. Sophie bounced in her seat. I want spaghetti. Carter smiled, the expression feeling rusty from disuse. Spaghetti with extra meatballs it is. He glanced at Rachel. And for you? She mumbled something about the chicken, her voice barely audible. Carter ordered it along with sides, bread, dessert, treating the meal like any business dinner where budget never entered the equation. When Mrs. Patterson left, the awkward silence descended. Sophie broke it with the fearless curiosity of 5-year-olds everywhere. Did you come to dinner alone? Carter managed a laugh that didn't sound entirely forced. I did. Do you have kids? His throat tightened. I do. A daughter named Madison. Everyone calls her Maddie. Sophie's eyes went wide. How old is she? Exactly your age. 5. Where is she? Chicago, with her mommy. Sophie tilted her head, processing this information with visible concentration. That's far away. It is, very far. Do you miss her? The question, asked with such simple directness, bypassed every defense Carter had built over 2 years of therapy and careful emotional management. His voice came out rough. Every single day. Rachel's hand found her daughter's shoulder, a gentle warning about boundaries, but her eyes, when they met Carter's, held recognition rather than judgment. She'd heard the truth in those 4 words, the kind of pain that didn't need explanation. Sophie pulled a crumpled paper from her backpack, completely oblivious to the emotional undercurrent. Look what I made at school. The drawing showed a Christmas tree rendered in enthusiastic crayon strokes, ornaments like multicolored circles, a star on top that took up a quarter of the page. Stick figures stood around the tree, smiling despite their anatomical impossibilities. Carter took the paper as if it were important corporate documentation. This is wonderful. You're very talented, Sophie. The girl beamed with the pure joy of recognized accomplishment. Thank you. Do you like the star? It's the best part. Very bright. Rachel watched this exchange with an expression Carter couldn't quite read. When was the last time someone had listened to her daughter like this? Treating a child's artwork as worthy of genuine attention rather than perfunctory praise. When was the last time someone had listened to Rachel herself? The food arrived faster than expected, Mrs. Patterson clearly understanding this wasn't a normal dinner. Sophie attacked her spaghetti with the enthusiasm of the truly hungry, sauce immediately decorating her face. Rachel ate slowly, still uncomfortable with accepting what she clearly viewed as charity. Carter found himself asking questions he usually reserved for business meetings. Except these mattered in ways quarterly projections never would. "What do you do, Rachel?" She hesitated, chewing thoughtfully before answering. "Retail. Patterson's department store." She didn't mention that she'd once been something else, something that required training and skill and dedication. Carter filed away the information anyway, noting the way she said retail like an apology. The slight tensing of her shoulders that suggested the job wasn't a choice made from abundance of options. The holiday season must be exhausting. Rachel's surprise at the observation showed in her eyes. "It is. Most people don't think about that. They should." Carter meant it. Retail workers keeping stores running while everyone else enjoyed family time, dealing with frustrated customers and impossible demands, standing for hours because sitting wasn't allowed even when the store was empty. The conversation flowed easier after that. Sophie dominated with stories about school, about her teacher who was nice but strict, about the drawing contest she'd won with a picture of a sunset. Carter listened with the full attention he usually reserved for investor pitches, asking follow-up questions, genuinely interested in the small details of a 5-year-old's world. Rachel slowly relaxed her shoulders, dropping from their defensive hunch. She even smiled when Sophie told a particularly animated story about a classmate who'd gotten glue in her hair. The smile transformed her face, erasing years of stress and revealing the woman she might be if life had been kinder. "You have a daughter Maddie's age." Rachel's question came tentatively, as if unsure whether the topic was allowed. Carter nodded. "She's in Chicago, with her mom and—" He paused, the word stepfather sticking in his throat. "Her mom's boyfriend." Sophie looked up from her spaghetti. "Don't you live together? We used to. But not anymore." The little girl absorbed this with the philosophical acceptance children displayed about divorce, a reality so common it barely registered as unusual. Why not? Rachel made a small sound of parental mortification. "Sophie, that's not—" "It's okay." Carter met Sophie's eyes, seeing nothing but innocent curiosity. "Sometimes grown-ups stop being happy together. It's sad, but it happens." "Are you sad?" The question was a knife between his ribs, sharp and unexpected. "Yes, I'm sad I don't get to see her very often." Sophie nodded solemnly. "That would make me sad too." The meal continued with lighter topics, but something had shifted. Rachel wasn't looking at him like a stranger anymore. Her guard had come down enough to reveal the person underneath, someone who'd survived things Carter could only imagine, someone who loved her daughter with a fierceness that made his chest ache. When they finished, Sophie was yawning despite her best efforts to stay alert. Rachel glanced at the clock on the wall and her eyes widened. "Oh my goodness, we stayed so long. I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize." Carter had already settled the bill during a bathroom trip earlier, knowing Rachel would protest if given the chance. "It was my pleasure, really." Rachel saw him reach for his wallet and started to object. "No, let me pay for our part, please. It's already taken care of." Her face flushed. "That's not fair. You can't just—" Carter kept his voice gentle. "Fair is subjective. Let me have this, please." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She blinked away quickly. "You have no idea how much this meant." "I think I do." The words hung between them, laden with meanings neither was ready to examine. They stood, Sophie immediately running over to hug Carter's leg with the unself-conscious affection of small children who'd decided someone was safe. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." The nickname made him smile. "You're very welcome, Sophie. Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas." She released him, grabbing her mother's hand. Rachel squeezed his hand briefly, the contact warm and over too quickly. "Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, the pleasure was mine." And it was true in ways that surprised him. Carter stood at the door, watching them disappear into the December night. Sophie skipped despite the late hour, her light-up shoes blinking cheerfully. Rachel's arm went around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her close against the cold. They turned the corner and were gone, two people heading home to a life Carter would never know, struggles he couldn't fix, problems his money wouldn't solve. He returned to his table, sat down in the silence they'd left behind. The chair Sophie had occupied still held the imprint of her small weight. The napkin Rachel had used sat crumpled next to the water glass she'd emptied. Evidence of their presence, proof the last hour had been real and not some stress-induced hallucination. Something inside Carter had shifted, cracked open in a way he couldn't name. The emptiness in his chest felt different now, not filled exactly, but touched by something that might be hope, and if he was brave enough to call it that. He'd made two people happy tonight, given a little girl. The restaurant dinner she'd wanted, taken some of the weight off a mother's shoulders for one evening. It wasn't enough. It didn't fix anything. But it had mattered. He pulled out his phone, stared at Maddie's name in his contacts. His finger hovered over the call button before he put the device away. Tomorrow, he'd try again tomorrow, keep trying until his daughter remembered his voice, until the distance between them felt like miles instead of lifetimes. Carter stood, left the diner, climbed into his car. The drive home took him through neighborhoods decorated for the holiday, houses with lights and inflatable Santas and families visible through windows. His penthouse waited empty and pristine and worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. He thought about Rachel counting coins, about Sophie's hopeful face, about the way it felt to be needed even for just one dinner, even by strangers who'd probably forgotten him already. The feeling stayed with him all the way home. Carter's penthouse occupied the 27th floor of a building that overlooked the harbor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views that real estate agents called breathtaking, and Carter had stopped noticing years ago. He stood at the glass, now tie loosened jacket discarded on the leather couch that cost more than some cars, staring at the city lights without seeing them. His phone sat on the granite counter, silent and accusatory. He'd tried calling Maddie again at 9, knowing bedtime was 9:30 in Chicago, hoping Rebecca might let him say goodnight. The phone had rung 4 times before going to voicemail. He'd tried again immediately, the second attempt rejected after a single ring. The text that followed was Rebecca's voice without the pretense of civility. "She's asleep. Stop calling tonight." Carter had stared at those words for a full minute before typing a response. "Tomorrow, then." No answer had come. He pulled out his wallet, now flipping past the credit cards and business cards and folded receipts until he found the small compartment he never let anyone see. The photo inside was worn at the edges from handling the colors, slightly faded despite being only 2 years old. Maddie at 3, ice cream cone gripped in both hands, chocolate smeared across her chin gap, toothed smile. Light blonde hair falling into her eyes. She was looking at the camera like it was the best day of her life, because it had been. The aquarium in Boston, the penguin exhibit, lunch at the outdoor cafe where she'd gotten more ice cream on her dress than in her mouth. Before the divorce, before Chicago, before Mark. Carter's thumb traced the edge of the photo. How many Christmases had he already missed? How many more before she stopped asking when Daddy was coming to visit, stopped mentioning him in school assignments about family? Stopped including him in the careful accounting of people who mattered 2 Christmases apart. By the time she was 18, that would be math he couldn't bear to complete. The penthouse felt enormous around him. 3 bedrooms because the real estate agent had insisted a man of his position needed space for guests and a home office and a gym. The master suite alone was larger than most apartments. Marble counters, high-end appliances, art on the walls. Chosen by an interior designer he'd met twice. Everything curated and expensive and utterly devoid of the only things that would have made it a home. No toys scattered across the floor. No drawings held to the fridge with magnets. No small shoes by the door or voices calling him daddy, or chaos of family dinner where everyone talked over each other and nobody cared about the mess. Margaret Sullivan, his housekeeper of 15 years, had left a note on the counter. Her handwriting was neat, practical: "Merry Christmas, Mr. Reynolds." Leftovers in fridge. Don't work too late. Maggie. The kindness in those simple words made his throat tight. Maggie understood loneliness better than most, a widow with no children who'd made Carter's household her purpose. She worried about him in the maternal way of people who'd decided you needed looking after whether you wanted it or not. He didn't eat the leftovers. Instead, he poured a scotch he didn't drink, standing at the window, watching Boston celebrate a holiday that had lost all meaning beyond another day of missing his daughter. His mind kept returning to the diner, to Rachel's careful counting of coins that added up to barely enough, to Sophie's hopeful face, to the way it had felt to make someone smile to matter for an hour to people who expected nothing from him beyond basic human kindness. When was the last time anyone had looked at him like that? Not as CEO Carter Reynolds, not as the man worth $200 million, not as the ex-husband or the absent father or the investor whose approval could make or break a startup. Just as Carter, a person who'd offered dinner and conversation. The scotch sat untouched until it warmed. Carter finally poured it down the sink, went through the motions of getting ready for bed in a bathroom larger than some people's inner living spaces. Marble and chrome and a shower with 6 different settings he'd never bothered to learn. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, he dreamed of small hands covered in spaghetti sauce, of light-up shoes blinking in the dark, of a voice asking with perfect innocence, "Do you miss her?" every single day. Christmas morning arrived with pale winter light filtering through windows Carter had forgotten to cover. He'd slept 4 hours, maybe less, waking multiple times to check his phone for messages that never came. The apartment was silent except for the distant sounds of the city traffic and horns and life happening somewhere else to people who belonged to it. The coffee maker was automatic, grinding beans and brewing at precisely 7 a.m., whether anyone was there to appreciate it or not. Carter stood in the kitchen mug, warming his hands, staring at nothing. His phone finally rang at 8:30. Brennan's name on the screen, the call inevitable as sunrise. Carter answered on the 3rd ring. "Merry Christmas, man." Brennan's voice carried the slightly frantic edge of someone managing 3 children on holiday morning. "You doing okay?" "Fine." The lie tasted familiar. "Liar. Come over. Kids are already destroying the living room and Susan made enough food for an army." "I appreciate it, but you're going to sit alone in that mausoleum you call home and feel sorry for yourself." His friend's bluntness was earned through years of proximity. "That's not healthy and you know it." "I'm fine, Brennan." A sigh. "Fine. But I'm coming by later. We're going for a walk or something. You need to leave that apartment." After they hung up, Carter made the mistake of checking his email. Christmas greetings from business associates, automated messages from services he'd forgotten subscribing to. Nothing that required his attention. The absence of anything from Rebecca or Maddie was louder than any notification could have been. He tried calling at 9, the time Maddie usually woke on weekends. Rebecca answered this time, her voice already tired despite the early hour. "She's opening presents." "Can this wait?" "I just wanted to say Merry Christmas." "Fine. Hold on." The sound of the phone being handed over, Rebecca's voice in the background telling Maddie it was Daddy. The squeal of excitement that followed made Carter's eyes burn. Daddy Maddie's voice burst through the speaker, all energy and joy. Merry Christmas, sweetheart." Carter sat down on the couch, gripping the phone. "What did Santa bring you?" The next 5 minutes was a breathless catalog of presents. A new bicycle, pink with streamers on the handles. A art set with real paints and brushes. Books about animals. Clothes from Grandma. A puzzle from Mark that had 1,000 pieces, which was basically impossible, but she was going to do it anyway. Carter listened to every word, committing the details to memory. "That's amazing, sweetheart. It sounds like you made out really well." "I did." "What did you get?" The question caught him off guard. "Nothing yet." "I haven't opened my presents." A lie, since there were no presents to open. The gifts from his staff were still wrapped on the dining room table, bottles of wine and gourmet food baskets he'd eventually donate. No one had given him anything that mattered because the only person whose gifts he wanted was 900 miles away. Oh, Maddie's disappointment was audible. Well, I hope you get good stuff. I'm sure I will. He paused, searching for the right words. I miss you, Maddie. So much. Miss you too, Daddy. Then, barely missing a beat, Mark's making hot chocolate with the little marshmallows. Can I go? The dismissal was casual, unintentional, and absolutely devastating. Of course. Go ahead. I love you. Love you too. Bye. The call ended before he could respond. Carter sat holding the phone for longer than necessary, replaying those 10 words. Mark's making hot chocolate. Can I go? Bye. His daughter's life was full of moments he wasn't part of, traditions being built without him. Memories forming where he existed only as the voice on the phone who called at inconvenient times. He was becoming peripheral, optional, the parent you loved out of obligation rather than active presence. The realization wasn't new, but it cut deep anyway. Brennan arrived at 11 with coffee and determination. He took one look at Carter's face and changed whatever speech he'd planned. Bad call. She's happy. Carter meant it. That's good. It is. But it's also hard. They ended up walking along the harbor despite the cold hands shoved in pockets, breath visible in the December air. Brennan talked about his kids mourning the chaos of wrapping paper and assembly instructions, and his youngest daughter crying because her brother broke the arm off her new doll. The casual mention of problems that could be fixed with glue and patience made Carter's chest ache. Met someone last night. The words came out before Carter had decided to share them. At the diner, Brennan raised an eyebrow. Someone, a woman and her kid, they were trying to buy dinner with coins. I invited them to join me. His friend processed this, the silence thoughtful rather than judgmental. That was nice of you. It was selfish. Carter kicked at a piece of ice on the path. I didn't want to be alone, and they were there. Did they have dinner? Yeah. Then it was still nice. Brennan stopped walking, turned to face him. Look, I know Christmas is hard. I know you miss Maddie, but maybe doing something kind for strangers is exactly what you needed. Maybe. They walked another hour before Brennan insisted Carter come to dinner. The Sullivan house was exactly as advertised: chaos and noise and 3 children who treated Uncle Carter like a jungle gym the moment he walked through the door. Susan fed him enough for 3 people. Brennan's parents asked polite questions about work. And for a few hours, Carter could pretend he belonged to something bigger than his empty apartment and failed marriage. But when he left at 8, driving home through streets quiet with holiday stillness, the loneliness returned with crushing familiarity. The penthouse waited unchanged and uncaring. Carter stood at the windows again, looking at a city that sparkled with celebration, and thought about Rachel counting coins. About Sophie's light-up shoes, about the way it had felt to matter even briefly, even to strangers. The next 3 days passed in a blur of routine. Carter went to the office despite it being a holiday week, catching up on work that didn't need catching up on. He answered emails, reviewed projections, participated in a conference call with investors in Tokyo who didn't celebrate Christmas and wanted to discuss Q1 targets. The work was there because he made it be there, filling time that would otherwise demand he confront how little else existed in his life. On December 28th, Maggie cornered him in the kitchen. You need fresh air. Her tone left no room for argument. You've been cooped up here for days. I'm fine, Maggie. She gave him the look that had cowed him since he was 30 and newly divorced and barely functional. You're not. Go for a walk. Now. Carter knew better than to argue when she used that voice. He grabbed a jacket, took the elevator down 27 floors, and stepped into an afternoon that was cold and clear. Without conscious decision, his feet carried him toward the park. The common was decorated for the holidays, lights strung in trees that wouldn't be lit until evening. Wreaths on lampposts, families bundled in winter coats feeding ducks by the pond. Carter found a bench, sat down, pulled out his phone to review a contract that definitely could have waited until Monday. The shriek made him look up. A little girl, blonde hair flying behind her, running with the reckless speed of someone who hadn't learned caution yet. She was heading straight toward him, focused on something over his shoulder, not watching where her feet were going. Carter recognized her half a second before she registered his presence. Mr. Carter. Sophie skidded to a stop 3 feet away, her face splitting into a smile so wide it looked painful. Behind her, moving more slowly but with equal surprise, was Rachel. The coincidence felt impossible. Boston had 600,000 residents, and Carter had picked this specific bench in this specific park at this specific moment. The odds defied calculation. Sophie. Carter stood, unable to hide his own smile. What are you doing here, looking at the lights? The little girl bounced with excess energy. Mommy said we could see them one more time before they take them down. Rachel reached them slightly breathless, her expression cycling through shock and something that might have been pleasure before settling on embarrassment. I'm so sorry, she just ran off. She saw you, and don't apologize. Carter meant it. This is the best surprise I've had all week. The words hung in the air, more honest than he'd intended. Rachel's cheeks flushed, whether from the cold or the compliment, Carter couldn't tell. An awkward silence descended. Sophie filled it immediately. Are you looking at the lights too? I was just sitting. But I'd love to look at lights. Carter glanced at Rachel. Mind if I join you? He watched her hesitate, saw the internal debate play across her features. The same calculation as the diner, weighing trust against risk, kindness against caution. Sophie grabbed her mother's hand and pulled. Please, Mommy. Rachel's surrender came with a small smile. Okay, just for a bit. They walked slowly, Sophie darting ahead to point out decorations while staying within the invisible boundary her mother had clearly established. The little girl's enthusiasm was infectious, her running commentary filling the spaces where adult conversation might have faltered. Carter fell into step beside Rachel. How was your Christmas? Quiet. Her answer was careful. We stayed home mostly. Sophie got some presents from the church donation program. The casual mention of charity made Carter's chest tighten. He thought about the gifts he'd shipped to Maddie overnight delivery to guarantee Christmas morning arrival, tracking confirmations and signature required. Sophie had received donated toys from strangers, while his daughter opened professionally wrapped packages from her absent father. What about you? Rachel's question was tentative. Did you see Maddie? Just phone calls. His throat worked. She's in Chicago. They fell silent, watching Sophie examine a wreath like she'd never seen one before. Rachel spoke without looking at him. That must be incredibly hard. It is. The admission felt both too much and not enough. Every day is hard, Christmas especially. Rachel nodded, understanding in the small gesture. Sophie's father left before she was born. Never met her, never asked about her, so she doesn't know what she's missing, I guess. But I know. Carter turned to look at her properly. She was staring at her daughter profile, showing the tired beauty of someone who'd survived through sheer will. You've done this alone the whole time. Rachel's voice carried no self-pity, just fact. Found out I was pregnant at 24. He disappeared the next day, blocked my number, moved states. I haven't heard from him in 5 years. I'm sorry. She shrugged. It is what it is. We manage. Sophie returned, dragging them toward a fountain that had been turned off for winter. Halfway there, she tripped over her own feet, went down hard on the pavement. The cry that followed was immediate and sharp. Rachel moved fast, but Carter was closer. He knelt beside Sophie, saw the scraped knee, the blood already welling. Hey, you're okay. Let me see. Sophie was crying, holding her knee with both hands. It hurts, I know, sweetheart. Carter looked up at Rachel, who'd pulled a small first aid kit from her purse with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. Can I? Rachel's hands moved with practiced competence. She cleaned the scrape with an antiseptic wipe, applied antibiotic ointment, covered it with a bandage, all while murmuring comfort that gradually reduced Sophie's tears to sniffles. Carter watched the transformation. The retail worker disappeared, replaced by someone with medical training. confident movements that spoke of muscle memory and professional experience. When Rachel looked up, he couldn't hide his expression. "You're a nurse." It wasn't a question. Rachel's hands stilled. "Was." She finished securing the bandage. "Not anymore." "What happened?" She stood packed away. The first aid kit didn't meet his eyes. "Got fired. Too many late arrivals. Childcare kept falling through and I couldn't afford reliable daycare and—" Her voice trailed off. "Now I work retail." The pieces clicked into place. The skill, the efficiency, the way she'd handled Sophie's injury without hesitation. "You're trained, for all the good it does." Rachel's bitterness was quiet but unmistakable. "Can't work as a nurse without a current license. Can't renew my license without $400 I don't have. Can't afford childcare that would let me work nursing shifts. Can't get better pay without nursing credentials. It's circular and I'm stuck." Sophie was already running off again, knee forgotten now that it was bandaged. Rachel watched her go, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Carter wanted to fix this. The impulse was immediate and strong checkbook solutions to complex problems. $400. He spent that on dinner without thinking. He could hand her cash right now, solve the immediate barrier, clear the path. But something in Rachel's posture, the set of her shoulders, the way she'd pulled back into herself while admitting her circumstances, told him the offer would be worse than useless. This woman had pride. Accepting dinner had cost her. Accepting money would cost more. "That's not fair." He kept his voice neutral. "You're skilled, you want to work. The system should help, not trap." Rachel laughed without humor. "Life isn't fair. I learned that early." They kept walking, following Sophie's meandering path through the park. The conversation shifted to safer ground, small talk about the weather and Christmas decorations and whether it would snow before New Year's. But the knowledge of her nursing background sat between them, changing how Carter saw everything. This wasn't just a woman struggling with retail work. This was a medical professional sidelined by circumstance, skills going unused, while she stood behind a cosmetics counter selling products she couldn't afford to buy. Sophie found a cluster of pigeons and attempted to befriend them through sheer enthusiasm. The birds scattered, she gave chase, the cycle repeated with endless optimism. Rachel smiled, watching her daughter, and Carter was struck again by the transformation. When she wasn't weighed down by worry, Rachel was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or professional styling. She was real, present, surviving against odds that would have crushed someone softer. The afternoon stretched into early evening, the temperature dropping as the sun sank lower. Sophie's energy finally flagged her steps, slowing her chatter, quieting. Rachel checked the time on a phone with a cracked screen. "We should go. Bus runs less frequently after 6. Carter opened his mouth to offer a ride, closed it again. Too much, too fast. Instead, he crouched to Sophie's level. "It was really nice seeing you again, Sophie." She hugged him without hesitation, small arms tight around his neck. "You're nice, Mr. Carter. I like you. I like you too." When Sophie released him, Carter stood to find Rachel watching with an expression he couldn't quite name. "Thank you for walking with us." She meant it. This was nice. It was. Carter pulled out his phone, handed it to her. "Can I get your number? Maybe we could do this again sometime." Rachel's hesitation lasted only a second before she typed carefully, handed the phone back. "Sure, that would be nice." They said goodbye at the park entrance, Sophie waving enthusiastically as they headed toward the bus stop. Carter stood watching until they disappeared, then saved Rachel's contact with fingers that shook slightly. The walk back to his apartment took 20 minutes through streets growing darker. His phone buzzed halfway there, Brennan checking in with his usual persistence. Carter typed back that he was fine, better than fine, actually had run into someone from earlier in the week. Brennan's response was immediate. "The diner woman." "Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting." Carter didn't respond, couldn't explain the way his chest felt lighter than it had in months. He'd spent an hour walking around a park watching a 5-year-old chase pigeons making small talk about nothing important. It shouldn't have mattered. It mattered more than anything had in recent memory. Back in his penthouse, Maggie had left dinner in the fridge with reheating instructions and a note that she'd be back Monday. Carter ate standing at the counter, barely tasting the food, his mind replaying the afternoon. Rachel's nursing background changed everything. This wasn't just about helping someone through a hard moment. This was about someone who'd worked hard, trained, built skills only to have circumstances strip it all away. A system that punished single mothers for childcare problems, that made license renewal unaffordable, that trapped people in minimum wage work regardless of their qualifications. $400. The number kept circling his thoughts. Such a small amount relative to his resources, such an enormous barrier relative to hers. He couldn't just pay it. That much was clear. Rachel would refuse, possibly cut off contact entirely. But maybe there was another way. Some path that offered opportunity without insult, help without condescension. Carter spent the evening researching nursing license requirements in Massachusetts child care subsidies, hospital employment programs. The information was there, fragmented across government websites and healthcare systems, opportunities that required knowing where to look and having someone explain the process. His phone sat next to the laptop. Rachel's number now saved the possibility of connection, tangible in a way it hadn't been before. Sunday morning, he woke with an idea half-formed. By afternoon, the shape had solidified. He texted Rachel, fingers hovering over send for a full minute before committing. "Hi, it's Carter. Sophie mentioned she likes penguins. The New England Aquarium has a feeding Tuesday at 4. Would you two like to go?" The response took 10 minutes that felt like hours. She would love that. "Are you sure?" Carter typed quickly. "Absolutely. I'll pick you up at 3:30. "Okay, thank you." He sent the address request, received her location, spent the next 20 seconds staring at the map. The neighborhood was exactly what he'd expected: low-income housing on the edge of a district that hadn't seen investment in decades. Rachel and Sophie lived in a building that probably had broken heating and questionable plumbing. The distance between their worlds felt vast. Carter's penthouse versus Rachel's apartment, his wealth versus her coins, his options versus her constraints. But Tuesday at 3:30 he'd cross that distance. Would pick them up, take them to see penguins, give Sophie an afternoon of joy that cost her mother nothing but trust. It was a small thing. It wouldn't solve anything fundamental. But it was a start, and right now Carter needed to start somewhere. The next 2 days crawled past. Work provided distraction, meetings, and decisions that required attention, if not passion. Brennan caught him smiling at nothing Monday afternoon and demanded details Carter wasn't ready to share. Tuesday arrived cold and clear. Carter left the office at 2, drove home to change into casual clothes that he hoped looked approachable rather than expensive. Maggie watched him fuss with his jacket for the 3rd time and finally spoke. "You're nervous." "I'm fine." She smiled. "You're nervous. That's good. Means you care." At 3:20, he was in his car, address programmed into GPS, hands gripping the steering wheel harder than necessary. The drive took him through neighborhoods that grew progressively less maintained, buildings with peeling paint and cracked sidewalks, the visible markers of economic inequality rendered in concrete and brick. Rachel's building was worse than he'd imagined from the map. 6 stories of weathered gray concrete, windows that didn't quite fit their framed, steps to the entrance cracked and uneven. But the door was clean. Someone had swept recently, effort visible despite limited resources. Carter texted that he'd arrived rather than go inside. The wait lasted 3 minutes before the door opened and Sophie exploded out, already talking at full volume. "Mr. Carter, we're going to see penguins." Rachel followed more slowly, and Carter's chest tightened, seeing her in daylight outside the context of the park. She'd made an effort, her hair down instead of pulled back, wearing a coat that was still too thin but cleaner than the one from the diner. Sophie had on the sim light-up shoes and a dress that was clearly her best despite the visible wear. They'd prepared for this like it mattered. The realization made Carter's eyes burn. He helped Sophie into the back seat, made sure her seatbelt was secure. Tried not to notice the way Rachel gripped her purse like a lifeline. The drive to the aquarium took 20 minutes, Sophie providing running commentary the entire time, pointing out every decoration and dog and interesting cloud she saw. Rachel was quiet, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. At the aquarium, Carter paid for admission before Rachel could protest, got them through the entrance and into the vast space where tanks glowed blue and families moved between exhibits with the slow drift of people who had nowhere else they needed to be. Sophie's reaction made every awkward moment worth it. She pressed her face to the glass of the first tank, watching tropical fish swim lazy circles, her breath fogging the surface. The wonder on her face was pure and uncomplicated joy that required nothing but the present moment. They moved through exhibits slowly, Sophie stopping at every tank to ask questions. Carter and Rachel answered as best they could. The touch tank produced squeals when she gathered courage to pet a stingray. The jellyfish prompted theories about how they moved without bones. The sea turtles inspired declarations that she needed one as a pet. Rachel relaxed incrementally, her shoulders losing their tension, her smile coming more easily. By the time they reached the penguin exhibit, she was laughing at Sophie's enthusiasm, adding her own observations, treating the afternoon like a gift rather than charity. The penguin feeding was scheduled for 4 o'clock. They got spots at the front of the viewing area, Sophie bouncing on her toes with anticipation. When the handler asked for volunteers, Sophie's hand shot up with such force she nearly lifted off the ground. The handler chose her along with 2 other children. Sophie was given a fish, shown how to throw it, watched a penguin waddle over and gulp it down. The joy on her face could have powered the city. Carter pulled out his phone, captured the moment, sent the photo to Rachel without thinking. She checked her phone, looked at the image, her eyes immediately wet. "Thank you." Her voice was barely audible over the crowd. "This means everything to her. I'm glad." They stayed another hour after the feeding, wandering exhibits at Sophie's pace. The little girl's energy seemed inexhaustible, her questions endless, her capacity for wonder. Something Carter had forgotten existed. When they finally left, the sun was setting, the sky streaked orange and pink. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat before they'd made it 3 blocks, her head lolling against the window. The penguin's stuffed animal Carter had bought clutched to her chest. Rachel watched her daughter in the rearview mirror, her expression soft with love, so fierce it hurt to witness. She never gets to do things like this. The confession came quietly. Aquariums cost money we don't have. Her friends from preschool go to places like this all the time and she never says anything. But I know she wishes. You're doing everything you can. It doesn't feel like enough. Because you love her. That's what parents who love their kids feel. Never enough, always wanting more for them. Rachel turned to look at him, really look, her eyes searching his face. You feel that way about Maddie, every day. They drove in silence after that, Sophie sleeping soundly in the back. When Carter pulled up to Rachel's building, she made no move to get out immediately. I need to tell you something. She spoke without looking at him. I was a pediatric nurse, got fired 2 years ago because I kept being late. Childcare fell through constantly and I couldn't afford reliable help, and my manager finally had enough. I've been trying to get my license renewed ever since, but it costs $400, and every time I save anything close, Sophie needs shoes or the electricity gets shut off or something breaks and the money goes there instead. Carter kept his hands on the wheel, gave her space to continue. I tell you this because I don't want you to think I'm just retail. Rachel's voice was steady despite the emotion underneath. I worked hard to become a nurse. I was good at it. Kids trusted me. Parents asked for me specifically. And I lost all of it because I couldn't afford childcare, and the system punishes poor people for being poor. You're still a nurse. Carter finally looked at her. A job title doesn't change what you know how to do. Try telling that to hospitals. She smiled without humor. No current license means no employment, no exceptions. That's not right. Lots of things aren't right. Rachel opened her door, glanced back at Sophie, still sleeping. I should get her upstairs. Wait. Carter reached under his seat, pulled out the small bag he'd hidden there earlier. Small gifts, nothing expensive. Just things that had made him think of Sophie and Rachel while walking past stores on his lunch break. I got something for Sophie. I hope that's okay. Rachel's face did something complicated. Carter, you don't have to. I wanted to. Please. She took the bag, slowly opened it to reveal a simple rag doll with brown yarn hair and a red dress along with a light-up headband decorated with small stars. The doll was $18 from a local toy store, the headband $12. $30 total, nothing to Carter, probably half a week's groceries to Rachel. Her hands shook holding them. This is too much. It's really not. Rachel's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. You can't keep doing this. Doing what? Being so kind. She looked at him directly. We can't repay you. I can't afford to reciprocate, and Sophie's going to get attached, and when you realize this is too much trouble or too complicated or not what you wanted, she'll be heartbroken, and I can't. Her voice broke. Carter reached across the center console, took her hand without thinking. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. Rachel's whisper was fierce. Nobody can promise that. No, but I can promise I'll try. I can promise I won't disappear without warning. I can promise that if something needs to change, we'll talk about it like adults instead of me just vanishing. Why? The question was small and broken. Why do you care? Because when I'm with you and Sophie, I remember what matters. Carter squeezed her hand gently. My whole life is board meetings and quarterly projections and chasing numbers that don't mean anything. But with you two, I feel human again. Present, like I'm actually here instead of going through the motions. Rachel cried silently, tears tracking down her face without sound. Carter found a napkin from the glove box, handed it to her, waited while she composed herself. Okay. Her voice was thick. Okay, but slow. We go slow. As slow as you need, and no more expensive things, just time. That's all we need from you, just time. He could do that. Would gladly do nothing but spend time with them if that was what Rachel would allow. She gathered Sophie from the back seat, the little girl stirring but not fully waking. Carter handed Rachel the bag with the doll and headband, watched her juggle her daughter and the gifts and her purse while trying to maintain dignity. Let me help you to the door at least. I've got it. But Rachel's smile was genuine this time. The walls coming down incrementally. Thank you, Carter, for all of this. Thank you for letting me be part of it. They were almost to the building entrance when Sophie woke enough to register where they were. She looked around, confused, saw Carter standing by his car, waved sleepily. Bye, Mr. Carter, bye, Sophie, sweet dreams. Rachel disappeared into the building, the door closing behind her with a click that felt final. Carter stood on the sidewalk, the December cold seeping through his jacket, watching the windows until a light came on in what must be their apartment. 3rd floor, probably no elevator. Rachel carrying a sleeping child up 2 flights of stairs at the end of a day that had started long before the aquarium. His phone buzzed. Rachel's number on the screen, a text that made his heart skip. Sophie woke up in the elevator. She wanted you to know she loves the doll and the headband, and she's naming the doll Rosie after her favorite flower. Thank you for today. It was perfect. Carter typed back quickly. The pleasure was all mine. Thank you for sharing your afternoon. Good night, Carter. Good night, Rachel. He drove home through streets that looked different, somehow brighter, despite the darkness full of possibility he hadn't noticed before. The penthouse waited empty as always, but the emptiness felt less oppressive now. Carter stood at his windows looking at the city, thinking about a little girl, naming a doll Rosie, about a woman who'd lost her career to circumstances beyond her control, about second chances and small moments that mattered more than all the money he'd spent chasing happiness in the wrong places. His phone rang at 11 p.m. Unknown number. Carter answered anyway, some instinct making him pick up. Mr. Reynolds, a woman's voice professional and strained. This is Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from Children's Hospital Emergency Room. Carter's grip on the phone tightened. Yes, we have Rachel Hartford and her daughter Sophie here. The child is very ill. High fever, possible infection. Ms. Hartford gave us your number as her emergency contact. She asked me to call you. Time stopped. The city, the apartment, everything disappeared except the voice on the phone. I'm on my way. Carter was already moving, grabbing his keys, heading for the door. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her I'll be there in 15 minutes. He made it in 12, running 2 red lights and breaking the speed limit on streets empty enough to allow recklessness. The ER entrance glowed harsh and fluorescent automatic doors sliding open to admit him into antiseptic air. And the controlled chaos of medical emergency. Rachel sat in the waiting area, her face devastated, holding Sophie, who was clearly burning with fever. The little girl's face was flushed, her breathing labored, her small body limp in a way that terrified Carter more than anything he'd seen in business or divorce courts. Rachel's eyes found his, and the relief that flooded her expression nearly brought him to his knees. You came. Her voice broke on the words, always. Carter crossed the distance, knelt in front of them. I'm here. What happened? Sophie started crying around midnight. Fever of 104. I gave her medicine, but it's not coming down, and she's saying her ears hurt, and she's so hot, and I don't have insurance, and I don't know what to do, and Rachel's words tumbled over each other, panic overriding coherence. Carter put his hands on her shoulders, made her look at him. It's okay. We're at the hospital. They'll help her. It's going to be okay. A nurse appeared, called Sophie's name, led them back to an examination room where the real terror began. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison was in her late 40s with gray threading through dark hair pulled into a professional bun. She examined Sophie with efficient gentleness while Carter and Rachel hovered at the edges of the small examination room. The fluorescent lights made everyone look slightly ill, the smell of antiseptic sharp enough to sting. The thermometer beeped. 104.2. Morrison's expression stayed neutral in the way medical professionals learned early, revealing nothing that might panic anxious parents. She checked Sophie's ears with an otoscope, of the little girl whimpering at each touch. Listened to her lungs, the stethoscope moving across her small back while Sophie's breathing came rough and labored. Severe ear infection in both ears. The doctor straightened, making notes on a tablet. And I'm hearing fluid in her lungs. We need to run blood work, get her on IV antibiotics immediately. I want to admit her overnight for observation. Rachel's face went white. Overnight. How much we'll worry about costs later. Dr. Morrison's tone was kind but firm. Right now, we focus on getting Sophie better. A nurse appeared to start the IV line. Sophie cried when the needle went in, reaching for her mother with desperate hands. Rachel held her daughter close, murmuring comfort that did nothing to stop the tears. Carter stood useless at the foot of the bed, hands clenched at his sides, watching helplessness play out in real time. The IV fluid started dripping, antibiotics mixing with saline in the clear bag hanging above Sophie's head. Dr. Morrison stepped into the hallway, gesturing for Rachel to follow. Carter trailed behind without being asked, some instinct telling him this conversation mattered. Ms. Hartford, I need to ask some routine questions. The doctor's voice was gentle. When did Sophie last eat a full meal? Rachel's hands twisted together. Dinner yesterday, soup and crackers, and before that, lunch the day before. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly, her expression carefully neutral. I'm going to be direct with you. Sophie is significantly underweight for her age. A 5-year-old should be around 40 to 45 pounds. She's 32. The hallway tilted. Carter grabbed the wall for support, watching Rachel's face crumple with shame so profound it was painful to witness. Malnutrition weakens the immune system considerably. That's why this infection became so severe so quickly. Her body doesn't have the resources to fight properly. Rachel's voice came out broken. I feed her everything I have. I skip meals so she can eat more. I'm trying. I swear I'm trying so hard. I'm not judging you, Ms. Hartford. Dr. Morrison's tone held genuine compassion. I'm telling you so we can address it. Are you having food access issues at home? The question hung in the sterile air. Rachel stared at the floor, tears tracking down her face, her entire body radiating defeat. Carter stepped forward without planning to. Yes. His voice was steady despite the rage building in his chest. She's struggling financially. Working retail, raising Sophie alone. The system isn't giving her what she needs. Dr. Morrison looked between them, assessing. Are you her partner? A friend. The word felt inadequate, but Carter had nothing better to offer. The doctor nodded. We have social workers who can help connect you with resources. Food banks. SNAP benefits, childcare subsidies. There are programs available. Rachel finally spoke, her voice small. I know about the programs. The wait lists are 6 months long and the paperwork requires things I don't have. And every time I call, I get transferred to someone new who tells me something different. I'll have our social worker come talk to you tonight. Dr. Morrison squeezed Rachel's shoulder. We'll figure this out. Right now, let's focus on Sophie. Back in the room, Sophie was already drowsing from exhaustion and fever. Her small hand clutched the stuffed penguin from the aquarium. The only familiar thing in a frightening place. Rachel sank into the chair beside the bed, reaching through the bed rails to hold her daughter's free hand. Carter stood at the window, staring at the parking lot 3 stories below without seeing it. His mind was racing through calculations, solutions, the instinct to fix this screaming through every nerve. Rachel literally starving herself so her daughter could eat. Choosing between electricity and food, between shoes that fit and keeping the heat on, making impossible decisions every single day, while he'd been debating which restaurant to order from for dinner. The disparity was obscene. Hours passed in that strange hospital time where minutes stretched and compressed unpredictably. Sophie's fever started dropping around 3 a.m., the antibiotics finally taking hold. Dr. Morrison checked in twice more, her updates guardedly optimistic. The crisis was passing. Rachel never left the chair. Carter brought her coffee from the cafeteria, terrible but hot. She drank it without tasting, her eyes never leaving Sophie's sleeping face. Thank you for coming. Her whisper was barely audible. I didn't know who else to call. I'm glad you called me. She looked up at him, then eyes red from crying and exhaustion. Why are you doing this? The question deserved honesty. Because when I'm with you and Sophie, I feel like myself again. Like the person I wanted to be before I got lost in spreadsheets and board meetings and chasing success that turned out to be empty. Rachel's expression shifted, something vulnerable and scared flickering across her features. We can't be your redemption project, Carter. The words hit hard because they carried truth. You're not. You're just 2 people I care about who needed help tonight. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the hospital windows. Sophie woke properly around 6, her fever down to 100.1, asking for water in a voice that sounded more like herself. Rachel cried with relief, helping her daughter drink through a bendy straw while Carter stood back, giving them space. Morrison discharged them at 9 a.m. with prescriptions and instructions, and a referral to the social worker who'd stopped by at 7 to talk about assistance programs Rachel had already tried accessing. Carter paid the hospital bill at the desk while Rachel was in the bathroom with Sophie, the total making him physically ill. $3,400, more than Rachel probably made in 2 months, gone in 8 hours of medical care. The ride back to Rachel's apartment was quiet. Sophie dozed in the back seat, the antibiotics making her drowsy. Rachel stared out the window, her profile showing exhaustion that went bone deep. Carter pulled up to her building, helped carry Sophie upstairs when Rachel's arms gave out on the second flight. The apartment was exactly what he'd expected and somehow worse. One room with a Murphy bed folded against the wall, a kitchen alcove barely big enough for one person, a bathroom he could see from the doorway. A curtain partitioned off a corner where Sophie's bed sat, child-sized and covered with a thin blanket that had been washed so many times the pattern was fading. Everything was spotlessly clean. That detail mattered more than it should have, the visible evidence of Rachel's pride despite circumstances that would break most people. He laid Sophie on her bed, pulled the blanket up, watched her small chest rise and fall with sleep. Rachel stood in the kitchen alcove, arms wrapped around herself, looking lost in her own home. "I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. The hospital bill is handled." Rachel's jaw tightened. "I can't pay you back. I'm not asking you to." "Carter," her voice carried warning. "I can't be in your debt. It's not debt, it's just helping." She laughed without humor, the sound bitter and tired. "Right, because rich people help poor people out of pure kindness with no expectations." The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. Carter had expectations, did want something from this, even if he couldn't articulate what exactly. Connection, purpose, the feeling that his resources mattered for something beyond quarterly reports. "What if we're partners?" The idea formed as he spoke. Equal partners. You contribute what you can, I contribute what I can. Different resources, but same value. Rachel studied him, suspicion and hope warring across her exhausted face. "What does that even mean?" "It means you cook because you're better at it. I buy groceries because I can afford them. You help me understand Maddie's perspective because you're a mother. I help with things my resources make easier. We figure it out together instead of keeping score." The silence stretched long enough that Carter thought she'd refuse. Then Rachel's shoulders dropped, the fight draining out of her. "Okay, but I need rules, boundaries. Tell me what you need." They sat at her small table, Sophie sleeping soundly beyond the curtain, and negotiated the terms of a relationship neither fully understood. No major purchases without asking first. No decisions about Sophie without Rachel's input. Equal voices even if unequal resources. The right to say no without explanation. Carter agreed to everything. He would have agreed to anything if it meant staying in their lives. The next 2 weeks established a rhythm that felt both natural and surreal. Carter picked up Sophie from preschool 3 times a week, giving Rachel breathing room to work without worrying. They did grocery shopping on Saturdays, Carter paying while Rachel cooked meals that filled his empty penthouse with smells that made it feel almost like a home. He learned Sophie loved macaroni and cheese made from scratch, that Rachel had a gift for stretching ingredients into full meals, that eating dinner together at a table while a 5-year-old narrated her entire day was better than any restaurant he'd ever visited. Maddie called every Sunday at 7. Sophie was always included now, the 2 girls talking shyly at first, then with growing comfort. Maddie asked what Sophie liked. Sophie asked about Chicago. Carter watched the connection form with a heart that felt too full for his chest. But Rachel's walls stayed partially up. She pulled back whenever Carter got too close, emotionally deflecting with jokes or changing subjects when conversations turned too personal. They'd almost kissed twice, moments where the air changed and awareness crackled before Rachel found reasons to step away. "I'm not ready." Her explanation was simple. "I need time." Carter gave her time, gave her space, gave her patience he hadn't known he possessed. Brennan noticed the changes immediately. Carter showed up to the office smiling, left at reasonable hours. Actually listened during meetings instead of mentally composing emails. His best friend cornered him in the break room on a Tuesday afternoon. "You're different, lighter." "Am I?" Brennan crossed his arms, expression caught between happiness and concern. "This woman, Rachel. It's serious, I think so." Carter couldn't keep the smile off his face. "Yeah, it's serious." "What about the board? Vanessa's still pushing the marriage angle, using your image as ammunition. The board can deal with reality instead of optics." His friend's eyebrows rose. "That's new. You caring less about business politics?" "Maybe I'm finally figuring out what actually matters." What changed, Carter thought about Sophie's laugh, about Rachel's smile when she let her guard down about eating homemade pasta, while a child explained in excruciating detail why dolphins were better than sharks. Met two people who reminded me I'm human, not just a bank account with a pulse. Brennan grinned. Good, about time. But the corporate pressure was real. Vanessa Ashford stopped Carter in the hallway Friday afternoon, her expensive perfume announcing her presence before she spoke. The board is concerned about your focus lately. My focus is fine. You're leaving early, taking personal calls during business hours, bringing food from home instead of networking lunches. Her tone suggested these were crimes. It reads as distracted, unstable. I'm allowed to have a life outside this office, not when the company's reputation rests on your stability. Vanessa's smile was sharp. After the divorce, investors questioned your judgment. Getting involved with someone inappropriate could tank our stock price. The words inappropriate hung in the air like poison. Rachel is a nurse. Carter kept his voice level through sheer will. Skilled, intelligent, raising a child alone. There's nothing inappropriate about her. She works retail. Vanessa's dismissal was casual and cutting. Lives in subsidized housing, has a child from an unknown father. That's not the image Reynolds Tech needs its CEO projecting. Rage flooded Carter's veins, hot and immediate. What I do in my personal life is none of the board's business. Everything about you is the board's business when you're the face of this company. She turned to leave, paused. Think about what matters more, Carter. The woman or the empire you built. After she left, Carter stood in the empty hallway, fists clenched, breathing hard. The threat was clear. Continue with Rachel or protect the company. Choose the relationship or maintain his position. Except it wasn't a real choice. Not anymore. He drove to Rachel's apartment that night unannounced, knocked on her door at 8 p.m. She answered in pajama pants and an old t-shirt, hair pulled into a messy bun, confusion written across her tired face. Is everything okay? Can I come in? Rachel stepped aside, closing the door behind him. Sophie was already asleep, her soft breathing audible from behind the curtain. Carter stood in the center of the tiny apartment, suddenly unsure how to articulate the feelings overwhelming his usual careful control. I need to tell you something. That sounds ominous. Rachel's attempt at lightness fell flat. The board at my company thinks I'm distracted. That being involved with you is bad for business, damages my image, makes me look unstable. Her face went carefully blank. Oh, and they're probably right in some ways. I am distracted. I think about you and Sophie constantly. I leave work early to pick her up from preschool. I schedule meetings around dinners at your place because eating with you two matters more than networking lunches. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself. Maybe they have a point then. Maybe this is I don't care what they think. Carter stepped closer. I don't care about my image or their opinions or whether dating you fits their idea of appropriate. You and Sophie make me happy in ways I'd forgotten existed. That's worth more than any company. Her eyes filled with tears. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more. They stood in the small space between her table and kitchen, the air thick with words neither knew how to say. Rachel reached up, her hand trembling as it touched his face. I'm scared. Her whisper was broken. Everyone leaves eventually, and I can't survive you leaving too. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. No, but I can promise I'll try every day to be worth your trust. Rachel kissed him, then the first real kiss they'd shared. Desperate and tender and tasting of salt from tears neither could stop. Carter pulled her closer, careful with her fragility, pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact. When they broke apart, Rachel was crying openly. I don't know how to do this, how to let someone in. We'll figure it out together. She nodded against his chest, her arms tight around his waist, like he might disappear if she loosened her grip. Carter held her in the tiny apartment that was nothing like his penthouse, surrounded by evidence of her struggle and survival, and knew with absolute certainty that he'd choose this over anything the board could offer. Later, after Rachel had composed herself and they'd talked through her fears and his promises, Carter made the decision that would change everything. He'd help remove the barriers keeping Rachel stuck, not by throwing money at her, which would insult her pride and ruin everything they were building, but by creating opportunities she could seize on her own terms. The nursing license renewal cost $400. Hospital employment required proof of childcare. Both problems had solutions if approached correctly. Carter spent the weekend researching, making calls, pulling strings he'd never used for personal reasons. By Monday, he had a plan. Tuesday, he showed up at Rachel's apartment with his trunk full of winter coats, toys for Sophie, and a grocery delivery subscription already activated. The receipts in his pocket showed he'd also paid her rent for the next 3 months, cleared her utility bills, and submitted her nursing license renewal application with expedited processing. Rachel opened the door, saw the bags, and her face went from confused to furious in the span of a heartbeat. "What is this?" I wanted to help. Carter started pulling bags from the car. "These coats are warmer," Sophie needed. "Did I ask you to do this?" "No, but I thought the email notification on Rachel's phone chose that moment to arrive." Her face went white reading it, then red with anger Carter had never seen directed at him. "You paid my rent." Her voice was ice. "You went into my accounts and paid my bills without asking." "I was trying to help you. You were controlling me." The shout made Sophie appear at the door, her little face frightened. Rachel's hands shook with rage. "You don't get to make decisions about my life without asking. You don't get to invade my privacy because you have money and think you know better. Rachel, please, let's talk about this." "No." Her voice dropped to something dangerous and quiet. "Get out." Sophie started crying. "Mommy, why are you yelling? Mr. Carter needs to leave now." "But why?" Sophie's wail cut through the tension. "What did he do?" Carter crouched to her level, his chest splitting open. "I made a mistake, Sophie. I'm sorry." The little girl ran to him anyway, arms tight around his neck. "Don't go. I have to right now. But I'll see you soon, okay?" Rachel's voice was steel. "No, you won't." Understanding crashed over Carter like cold water. She was cutting him off, completely. The fury in her eyes left no room for negotiation or explanation. He stood Sophie, clinging until Rachel pulled her away gently but firmly. The little girl's crying intensified, her small hands reaching for Carter even as her mother held her back. "I'll give you space," Carter's voice came out wrecked. "But Rachel, please understand, I was trying to help. You were trying to own me." Tears streamed down her face, just like everyone else. Just like Sophie's father, who thought he could decide for me, my boss, who thought he knew better, every man who's ever seen me struggle and assumed I needed saving instead of partnership. The door slammed in his face, cutting off Sophie's crying and Rachel's accusations. Carter stood in the hallway, bags of coats and toys scattered around his feet, listening to the sound of his own stupidity echoing in the silence. He'd done exactly what his therapist warned against. Tried to fix everything with money, assumed his resources meant he knew better, steamrolled over Rachel's boundaries because he'd convinced himself it was for her own good. The same pattern that destroyed his marriage, the same arrogance that lost him Maddie's daily presence, repeated with the only two people who'd made him want to be better. Carter gathered the bags, mechanically loaded them back in his car, drove home to a penthouse that felt emptier than ever. His phone stayed silent, every text he sent going unanswered, every call going straight to voicemail. He'd been blocked, completely and thoroughly cut off from the woman he loved and the child who'd called him Mr. Carter with such trust. 2 weeks passed in a fog of work and regret. Carter threw himself into Reynolds Tech with the desperation of someone who'd lost everything else. 18-hour days, weekends in the office, responding to emails at 3 a.m. because sleep wouldn't come anyway. Brennan watched with growing concern. "You look like death. Feel worse than death." "Talk to her. She blocked my number. Returned everything I bought. Won't answer the door when I go there. Maybe give her more time." But time felt like the enemy. Every day that passed was another day Sophie thought he'd abandoned her. Another day Rachel's walls rebuilt themselves stronger than before. Another day the connection he'd treasured slipped further from reach. Maddie noticed during their Sunday call. "You're sad again, Daddy. Just work stress, sweetheart." Her small voice carried wisdom beyond 5 years. "Did you make someone mad?" "Yeah, I did something I thought was helping, but it hurt them instead." "Did you say sorry?" "She won't listen." Carter's throat closed up. "Then write her a letter, like you wrote me when I was sad about you and Mommy. Letters work when talking doesn't." The simplicity of his daughter's solution hit him hard. After the call ended, Carter sat down with paper and pen, words flowing faster than thought, 3 pages of handwritten honesty that laid bare every mistake and lesson in desperate hope that Rachel might forgive him. He drove to her building at 5 a.m., sat on the steps waiting for her to emerge for work. When the door finally opened and Rachel saw him, her face cycled through shock to anger to something that might have been pain. Carter stood, held out the envelope. "I won't bother you. Just please read this." Rachel took the letter without speaking. Carter walked away without looking back. Got in his car, drove home through dawn streets while his heart hammered against his ribs with hope and terror in equal measure. His phone buzzed 2 hours later. Rachel's name on the screen, a text that made breathing difficult. I read it. All of it. "Can we talk?" Carter's response was immediate. "Yes. When, where?" "I'll be there. My apartment. Tonight after Sophie's asleep. 8 p.m. "I'll be there." The hours until 8 p.m. stretched eternal. Carter tried working, gave up, tried eating, couldn't. Showered, changed clothes 3 times, arrived at Rachel's building at 7:50 and sat in his car until exactly 8 before climbing the stairs. Rachel opened the door before he knocked. Her eyes were red from crying, but her expression was calmer than he'd seen in weeks. "Come in." The apartment looked the same. Sophie's artwork on the walls, the table where they'd eaten together, the curtain hiding her daughter's bed. But the absence of Carter's presence over 2 weeks made it feel different, like he was intruding on a space that had learned to exist without him. They sat at the table, the same seats they'd occupied before everything fell apart. "I've been thinking about your letter constantly since this morning." Rachel's hands folded on the table, her voice steady. "About what you wrote, what you did, why I reacted the way I did. I'm sorry." Carter couldn't wait. "I'm so incredibly sorry. You were right about everything. I tried to control you because I couldn't stand watching you struggle when I had resources to fix it. But fixing isn't the same as supporting, and I violated your trust and autonomy, and I'm sorry." Rachel nodded slowly. "I overreacted too. You made a mistake, but I shut you out completely. Didn't give you a chance to explain or make it right. Just cut you off because cutting people off is safer than risking they'll hurt me worse later. We both have patterns." Carter's chest ached. "Mine is throwing money at problems. Yours is running before you can be left." Rachel's lips curved in something almost like a smile. "We're kind of a mess." "Yeah, but maybe we can be a mess together instead of separately." She reached across the table, her hand finding his. "Maybe we can." They talked through the night while Sophie slept beyond the curtain. Rachel explained the terror of depending on anyone after her father left when she was 10, after Sophie's biological father vanished, after every boss and landlord and system representative who'd treated her like a problem to be managed. Carter explained the pattern learned from a father who measured success in acquisitions, who'd taught him that providing was the only love language that mattered. "I want to try again." Carter's voice was rough with exhaustion and hope. "But I need you to teach me how to be your partner instead of your fixer." Rachel's fingers tightened around his. "I need to teach myself how to trust that you won't disappear the moment things get hard." They made new rules that night. Carter would ask before spending money on anything beyond groceries and gas. Rachel would communicate when she needed help instead of suffering in silence until she broke. Both would assume good intentions before jumping to anger. Both would choose conversation over withdrawal. By the time dawnlight crept through the small window, they'd rebuilt something stronger than before. Not perfect, still fragile, but rooted in honesty that hadn't existed when they'd been pretending they didn't have scars. "Can I kiss you?" Carter asked the question, deliberate. Rachel's smile was tired and real. Yes, the kiss was different from their first, less desperate, more certain, a promise rather than a plea. When they finally pulled apart, Rachel rested her forehead against his. "I got a job offer, last week. From Children's Hospital." Carter's heart leaped. "That's incredible. When do you start?" "February 15th. Her voice carried disbelief and joy. "Pediatric nursing, full benefits, $68,000 a year. It's more money than I've ever made in my life." "You did that. Not me, not anyone else, you. The nursing license you paid for. You still had to apply, interview, prove yourself." Carter cupped her face gently. "The license was just a door. You walked through it on your own merit." Rachel's eyes filled again, but these tears were different. "Thank you for understanding the difference." February arrived with bitter cold and the gradual warming of Carter's world. Rachel started at Children's Hospital on the 15th, her first day requiring new scrubs. Carter had asked permission to buy her nervous energy, filling his penthouse the night before as she triple-checked everything for the 100th time. What if I forgot everything? What if I mess up and hurt a kid? What if they realize they made a mistake hiring me? Carter pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. "You're going to be amazing. Those kids are lucky to have you." Sophie stayed with Carter that first day, her preschool schedule not aligning with Rachel's shift. The little girl was fascinated by his penthouse, running from window to window, marveling at how tiny the cars looked from so high up. "Do you live in the clouds, Mr. Carter?" "Sometimes it feels like it." They made breakfast together, Sophie standing on a chair to help crack eggs, getting more shell in the bowl than egg. Carter didn't care about the mess, too busy laughing at her running commentary about why chickens were silly for making eggs so breakable. When Rachel called at lunch, her voice shook with barely contained emotion. "I helped save a kid's life this morning. 4-year-old allergic reaction, needed epinephrine immediately. My hands remembered exactly what to do." Carter's chest swelled with pride so fierce it hurt. "I told you, you're exactly where you belong." The weeks that followed established new rhythms. Rachel worked 3 12-hour shifts per week, leaving her exhausted but glowing with the particular satisfaction of meaningful work. Sophie attended the hospital's subsidized childcare on those days, coming home with artwork and stories about her new friends. Carter adjusted his schedule to pick her up when Rachel's shift ran late, cooking dinners that were gradually improving from inedible to merely mediocre. Maddie's Sunday calls expanded to include Sophie by default, now the two girls talking about school and toys and which cartoon characters were best. Carter watched them bond with bittersweet joy, his daughter in Chicago forming a relationship with a little girl in Boston, creating connections that felt both natural and complicated. One Sunday in late February, Maddie asked the question Carter had been dreading. "Is Rachel your girlfriend now, Daddy?" He looked at Rachel, who was listening from the kitchen. She nodded permission. "Yes, sweetheart, she is." Silence on the line, long enough that Carter's heart started racing. Then Maddie's small voice. "Do you love her?" "I do." "More than Mommy?" The question was a knife, different than Mommy. "I loved your mom very much, but we weren't right together. Rachel and I are right together in different ways." Maddie processed this with the serious consideration she applied to important matters. "Does she make you happy?" "Very happy." "Okay then, that's good." The acceptance in her voice was simple and complete. "Can I meet her?" And Sophie Carter's eyes met Rachel's across the room. "Would you like that?" Rachel nodded, her expression nervous but willing. "Yes, baby, you can meet them. How about spring break? You could come visit for a week." The squeal that followed nearly deafened him. "Really? A whole week? A whole week? We'll do whatever you want." After the call ended, Rachel sat on the couch, her hands twisted together. What if she hates me? She won't. But what if she does? What if she thinks I'm trying to replace her mom? What if Carter kissed her quiet, gentle, and reassuring? Maddie is 5. She wants her dad happy. If you make me happy, she'll accept you. Rachel didn't look convinced, but she nodded anyway. March 1st arrived with unseasonable warmth and a conversation that had been building for weeks. They were at Carter's penthouse. Sophie asleep in the guest room that had gradually transformed into her space when Carter brought up the subject he'd been rehearsing for days. Move in with me. Rachel's head whipped up from the medical journal she'd been reading. What, you and Sophie? Move in here. Full time. Carter, it's been barely 2 months since we got back together, I know. But think about it practically. His arguments were prepared logical. Your apartment is tiny and this place has 3 bedrooms. Sophie could have her own space. You'd save money on rent. The commute to the hospital would be 20 minutes instead of 90. Those are all practical reasons. Rachel's voice was careful. What about emotional ones, because I want to wake up with you? Fall asleep knowing you're both safe and here. Come home to Sophie's laugh instead of silence. Build something that feels like family. The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to name. I'm scared. Rachel's admission was quiet, of moving too fast, of Sophie getting attached and this not working out, of losing our independence. What if we did a trial? Carter was making this up as he went, but it felt right. 6 months. You move in, we see how it goes. If after 6 months anyone is unhappy, we separate as friends. No hard feelings, no guilt. Rachel studied him, searching for something in his expression. And if it works, then we talk about forever. The word landed heavy and sweet. Rachel closed her eyes, thinking hard. Okay, but we need rules. They spent the next hour negotiating terms. Rachel would contribute to household expenses proportionally based on her salary. Sophie's schedule would be decided jointly. Rachel maintained the right to leave if things weren't working without Carter trying to convince her to stay. No major purchases without discussion. Equal partnership in all decisions regarding Sophie. Carter agreed to everything because having them here mattered more than control or pride or any of the patterns he was working to unlearn. Moving day happened over a weekend in mid-March. Rachel and Sophie's possessions fit in Carter's SUV in one trip, the reality of her poverty stark and undeniable. But Sophie's excitement transformed the process into adventure, the little girl racing through the penthouse, claiming her room with joy so pure it erased any awkwardness. Purple walls. Her eyes went enormous. Really, Carter had painted the guest room lavender the week before, consulted with a decorator on furniture appropriate for a 5-year-old. Really? Sophie threw her arms around his waist. Thank you, Daddy. The words stopped everyone. Sophie froze, clearly not having meant to say it aloud. Rachel's hand went to her mouth. Carter's vision blurred with tears. He blinked back quickly. He crouched to Sophie's level. Is it okay if you call me that? Sophie nodded frantically. Is it okay with you? Carter pulled her into a hug that felt like every good thing he'd been missing. It's more than okay, sweetheart. Rachel was crying openly now, happy tears that she wiped at ineffectively. Carter reached for her hand, pulled her into the embrace, the 3 of them standing in the lavender bedroom while Sophie chattered about where her toys should go, oblivious to the magnitude of what had just shifted. The first week brought adjustments nobody had fully prepared for. Sophie had nightmares in her new room, the space too big after years in a curtained corner. She'd appear at Carter's door at 2 a.m. clutching her penguin, asking if she could sleep with them. Rachel always said yes, making room in the middle of the bed, and Carter discovered that sleeping with a 5-year-old between them was uncomfortable and perfect simultaneously. Rachel struggled with not having control over the kitchen, used to her tiny space and her systems. Carter's expensive appliances intimidated her, until he admitted he barely knew how to use most of them. They learned together, burning dinners and laughing about it, ordering pizza when culinary disasters couldn't be salvaged. The first real fight happened on a Thursday. Carter came home with an iPad for Sophie educational games, already loaded, wrapped, and ready to surprise her. Rachel's expression went cold. "We talked about this. No expensive gifts without asking. It's educational. She can use it for school. She's 5 and in preschool. She doesn't need a $500 tablet." The argument escalated, old patterns threatening to resurface. Carter defending his choices, Rachel feeling controlled, both of them too loud. Until Sophie appeared, asking why they were yelling. The silence that followed was awful. Then Rachel spoke carefully. "Sophie, please go to your room for a few minutes while Daddy and I talk." After she left, they stared at each other across the kitchen. Carter broke first. "I'm sorry. You're right. I should have asked. I'm sorry for yelling." Rachel's anger deflated. "I just felt like you went behind my back." "I did. That was wrong. They compromised. The iPad stayed, but with strict screen time limits and only after homework. Rachel got veto power on all future tech purchases." Both apologized to Sophie for fighting, explaining that grown-ups disagreed sometimes, but it didn't mean anyone was leaving. March became April with growing comfort, the rough edges smoothed as routines established themselves. Carter learned that Rachel needed coffee before conversation in the morning. Rachel learned that Carter decompressed from work stress by cooking his terrible but enthusiastic attempts at new recipes, a sign of processing rather than hunger. Sophie thrived in ways that broke and remade Rachel daily. Proper meals meant healthy weight gain. Her own room meant better sleep. Consistent presence from both adults meant security she'd never had. The change was visible in her artwork, her energy, the way she laughed without the shadow of worry that used to dim her joy. Maddie's arrival was scheduled for March 25th, spring break Tuesday through the following Tuesday. Carter was a wreck the entire week before cleaning, obsessively planning activities, changing the plans, making Rachel review everything for the 5th time. "She's going to love you." Rachel's reassurance was patient. "She's 5. 5-year-olds are resilient. What if she thinks I'm replacing her mom?" "Then we'll explain you're not. We'll explain as many times as she needs to hear it." The day arrived with Carter at Logan Airport 2 hours early, pacing the arrivals area while Rachel and Sophie waited in the car. When Maddie finally appeared, walking with an airline escort assigned to unaccompanied minors, Carter's heart stopped and restarted. She looked so much older than the last visit. Taller, her blonde hair longer, wearing clothes he'd sent for Christmas that fit her perfectly. When she saw him, her face transformed with joy so complete it hurt. Daddy Carter caught her mid-run, lifting her off the ground, burying his face in her hair, while she wrapped arms and legs around him like a monkey. "I missed you so much, Maddie Bear." "I missed you too." She pulled back to look at him. "Are Rachel and Sophie here in the car? Nervous to meet you." Maddie's expression went serious. "Do they know I'm your real daughter?" "You're my first daughter always. Sophie has different parents, but yes, you're both my daughters now, if that's okay with you." They walked to the car hand in hand. Maddie's chatter filling the silence Carter's nerves had created. When they reached the SUV, Rachel and Sophie were visible through the window, both looking as terrified as Carter felt. Maddie's first words when she climbed in were directed at Sophie. "Hi, I'm Maddie. Your dad is my dad now too, so I guess we're sisters." Sophie's response was cautious. "Hi, I'm Sophie. Do you like penguins? I love penguins." Maddie's enthusiasm was instant. "Do you? They're my favorite?" The tension shattered like glass. By the time they reached the penthouse, the girls were deep in conversation about which animals were best and why dolphins were overrated despite being smart. Rachel remained quiet, letting the girls dominate. When they got to the apartment and Maddie ran off to see her room, Rachel finally spoke. "That was easier than expected. Give it time." Carter squeezed her hand. "The honeymoon period always ends." He was right. By day 3, the honeymoon was definitely over. Maddie's jealousy manifested in small ways initially. pointing out that this used to be just her daddy's house, mentioning things she and Carter did before Sophie existed, creating invisible hierarchies where she held seniority. Sophie responded by clinging to Carter, calling him daddy more frequently, making sure Maddie heard. The competition was subtle but real, both girls vying for attention from the father one had always known and the other had only recently gained. The breaking point came on day 5. An argument over toys escalated to shouting, both girls in tears. Maddie's accusation cut through the chaos. "This is my dad, you can't just take him." Sophie's response was equally fierce. "He loves me too." "You're not the only one." Rachel moved to intervene, but Carter stopped her. This was his to handle. He sat both girls down on the couch, positioned himself between them. "You're both my daughters, different but equal. I love you both completely, and there's no competition because love doesn't work like pizza." Maddie sniffled. "What do you mean pizza you can run out of? If you have 8 slices and give 4 to one person, you only have 4 left for everyone else, right?" Both girls nodded. "Love isn't pizza. It's more like a candle. You can light 1,000 other candles from one flame and the first candle doesn't get smaller. It stays bright while making everything else brighter too." Maddie considered this seriously. "So loving Sophie doesn't mean you love me less?" "Exactly. You're my first flame, Maddie. Always. But Sophie lights up my life too. Both of you make everything brighter." Sophie's small voice. "So we can share you." "You're not sharing like you're splitting something. You're both getting all of me. Different pieces maybe, but whole love for each of you." Maddie turned to Sophie. "I'm sorry I was mean. I was scared Daddy would forget about me." Sophie reached over, took Maddie's hand. "I won't let him forget you. You're my sister." The simplicity of children's forgiveness humbled every adult in the room. By dinner, the girls were playing together like the fight had never happened. That night, after both girls were asleep, Carter found Rachel on the balcony. "That was beautiful. What you said about the candle, therapy language." He smiled. "But it's true. Love multiplies. It doesn't divide." Rachel leaned into him. "You're going to be okay at this, at what being the father both of them need." The rest of Maddie's visit passed in a blur of activities. The aquarium again, this time with both girls marveling at jellyfish. A children's museum where they touched everything and learned nothing but had perfect fun anyway. Movie nights with popcorn and blanket forts. Rachel teaching both girls to bake cookies, flour covering every surface, including the children. Saying goodbye at the airport was harder than any previous parting. Maddie clung to Carter, tears soaking his shirt. "I don't want to go back, I know, baby. But you'll be back soon. Summer vacation, remember, 8 whole weeks. That's forever from now, it'll go fast. And we'll FaceTime every Sunday like always." Maddie pulled back, her face fierce. "Promise you won't forget me when I'm gone?" "Never. You're my first flame, remember, always burning bright." She hugged him once more, then surprised everyone by hugging Rachel too. "Thank you for taking care of my dad." Rachel's voice was thick. "Thank you for sharing him with us." On the drive home, Sophie was unusually quiet. Carter glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You okay, sweetheart? I miss Maddie already." "Me too. When's she coming back?" "June 15th. 78 days. Sophie counted on her fingers, gave up, accepted the number on faith. "That's a lot of days." "It is. But she will come back, I promise." May slid into June with the particular acceleration of time that happens when happiness makes days blend together. Carter's work found better balance. Brennan commenting that the old obsessive Carter was gone and good riddance. Rachel flourished at the hospital, her supervisor mentioning promotion possibilities that made her eyes shine with possibilities she'd stopped letting herself imagine. Sophie finished preschool with a small graduation ceremony that had both adults crying more than the 5-year-olds. She'd be starting kindergarten in September, real school with real homework, growing up faster than anyone was ready to acknowledge. Maddie called daily as June 15th approached, her excitement building until she could barely complete sentences. I'm coming in 5 days and we're going to have the best summer and I can't wait. June 14th, Carter cleaned the penthouse top to bottom despite Maggie's protests that she'd already done exactly that. Rachel watched him scrub kitchen counters for the third time and finally intervened. She's going to love being here regardless of whether the counters are spotless, I know. I just want everything perfect, it already is. June 15th arrived with sunshine and chaos. Maddie's flight landed at noon, her energy when she emerged from the gate borderline manic. She talked nonstop the entire drive home, barely pausing for breath. Sophie trying to keep up with the verbal onslaught and mostly failing. The first week was adjustment. Maddie had her own room, her own space, her own routines to establish in a home that was both familiar and foreign. She was used to Rebecca's house rules, Mark's parenting style, the structure of her Chicago life. Carter's penthouse operated differently and the culture clash created friction nobody had fully anticipated. Bedtime was the first battle. At Rebecca's house, Maddie went to bed at 8 sharp. Sophie's bedtime was 8:30. Maddie saw this as unfair despite being the same age. Why does she get to stay up later? She doesn't. We're moving both of you to 8:30 for the summer. Carter's patience was already wearing thin on day 3. But Mom makes me sleep at 8. We're not at Mom's house. We're here and here. The bedtime is 8:30. The argument escalated, Maddie digging in with the particular stubbornness she'd inherited from Carter himself. It ended with her crying in her room, refusing dinner, dramatic in the way only small children could achieve. Rachel found Carter an hour later, head in his hands at the kitchen table. She hates it here. She doesn't. She's adjusting. Different houses, different rules, she'll adapt. What if this whole summer is a disaster, then we survive it and try again next time? Rachel's calm was anchor in his spiral. She's testing boundaries. That's normal and healthy. It means she feels safe enough to push back. The dynamics shifted when Sophie decided to take matters into her own hands. She knocked on Maddie's door that night after everyone else was asleep. "Can I come in?" Maddie's muffled voice. "I guess." Sophie climbed onto the bed, her penguin clutched tight. "I know you miss your other house." Maddie sat up, surprised. "How did you know?" "Because sometimes I miss our old apartment even though this place is better." Sophie's wisdom was simple. Missing places is okay. You can like here and miss there. But everyone here has different rules and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Me neither when I first came. But you learn. And Daddy and Mommy help when you mess up. Maddie processed this. Mommy is Rachel if you want. Or just Rachel, whatever feels right. Maddie was quiet for a while. "Then can I tell you a secret?" Sophie nodded eagerly. "I was mean about the bedtime because I was scared you were better at living here than me. Like Daddy would like you more because you know all the rules already." The confession hung in the dark room. Sophie reached over, grabbed Maddie's hand. "He doesn't love you less. He told me about the candle thing. Both our lights are bright." Maddie squeezed back. Sisters. By week 2, they'd found their rhythm. Carter established consistent rules that applied equally to both girls. Rachel navigated the careful balance of maternal authority without trying to replace Maddie's mother. The girls formed alliance against shared enemies like vegetables in early bedtimes. The summer became a collection of moments that would define all of them. Beach days where sand got everywhere and nobody cared. Cooking experiments that sometimes produced edible results. Movies in the home theater with both girls piled on Carter while Rachel captured photos of the chaos. Rachel and Maddie bonded over baking, the little girl fascinated by the process of turning ingredients into cookies. One afternoon, flour covering both of them, Maddie asked the question she'd clearly been building toward. "Can I call you Miss Rachel like Sophie does?" "You can call me whatever makes you comfortable." Maddie considered seriously. "I don't want to call you Mom because I already have a mom. But I like you a lot and Miss Rachel feels too formal." "What feels right?" Maddie's face brightened. "What about Ray?" "That's like a nickname. Friends have nicknames." Rachel's eyes filled with the tears that came too easily these days. Ray is perfect. By August, the approaching end hovered over every activity. Maddie would leave August 10th, returning to Chicago for the last weeks before school started. The countdown made everything bittersweet awareness that summer's magic was finite. The last week, Carter took both girls to Cape Cod for 4 days. They rented a cottage on the beach, spent days building sandcastles and jumping waves, nights roasting marshmallows and telling stories until everyone's eyes were too heavy to stay open. On the final night, both girls asleep in the cottage's loft, Carter and Rachel sat on the beach watching stars that actually appeared away from city lights. 6 months is almost up. Rachel spoke into the darkness. The trial period. Carter turned to look at her, backlit by moon reflecting off ocean. Do you want to leave? No. Do you want me to? God, no. They sat in silence, waves providing rhythm to thoughts too big for easy words. Then I think we should talk about forever. Rachel's voice was steady despite the enormity of the suggestion. Carter's heart hammered against his ribs. What does forever look like to you? Marriage, eventually. Rachel turned to face him. Not right now. Sophie and Maddie need time to adjust to this new normal before we change it again. But someday. If you want that too, I want that more than anything. Then ask me. When the time is right, when the girls are ready, ask me and I'll say yes. The promise hung between them, weighted with certainty that felt both terrifying and inevitable. August 10th arrived too fast. The airport goodbye was brutal. Maddie crying so hard she couldn't speak, Sophie crying because Maddie was crying, Rebecca looking uncomfortable with emotions she hadn't authorized. Carter held his daughter until the very last moment, whispering promises about Thanksgiving and Christmas and how fast 3 months would pass. When she finally had to go through security, she turned back 5 times to wave, each time breaking Carter's heart a little more. The drive home was silent, Sophie exhausted from crying, Rachel's hand on Carter's thigh while he drove. Back at the penthouse, the space that had been full of noise and energy echoed with absence. That night, Sophie appeared at their bedroom door at 11. I can't sleep. My room feels too quiet. Come here, baby. Rachel made space in the bed, Sophie crawling between them like she had months ago when she first moved in. Carter wrapped arms around both of them, Rachel's head on his shoulder. Sophie's small body warm against his chest. This was family. This complicated, imperfect, beautiful thing they'd built from loneliness and coins and kindness. The next morning, Sophie at preschool's extended summer program, Carter took Rachel to breakfast at a cafe with outdoor seating. After they ordered, he pulled a small box from his pocket. Rachel's eyes went wide. Carter. The trial period ended yesterday, 6 months exactly since you moved in. He opened the box, revealing a simple ring with a single diamond. Not enormous, not ostentatious, but unmistakably an engagement ring. I know we said to wait, but I don't want to wait anymore. Rachel's hand covered her mouth, tears already falling. Rachel Marie Hartford, you've shown me what love actually means. Not fixing or controlling or providing, just showing up, being present, choosing each other every day. You've made me a better father, a better man, a better human. You and Sophie changed everything. Will you marry me? Yes. The word came out choked with emotion. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring on her shaking hand, both of them crying in the middle of a cafe while other patrons pretended not to notice. The kiss that followed was salt and promise and the particular sweetness of choosing someone who chose you back. They told Sophie that night, both of them nervous about her reaction. The little girl looked at the ring at their faces and grinned. Does this mean Maddie gets to be my sister forever? Carter laughed. Yes, baby, forever. Sophie threw her arms around them both. Good, I want her forever. They told Maddie via FaceTime that Sunday. Her squeal of excitement so loud, Rebecca appeared in frame asking what was wrong. Daddy and Ray are getting married, Maddie bounced with energy that translated poorly through video. I'm going to be flower girl, right, both of you? Carter pulled Sophie onto his lap. Both my daughters walked down the aisle. Rebecca's expression was complicated, but she managed congratulations that sounded almost genuine. "When can we come visit to celebrate Thanksgiving?" Carter suggested. "We'd love to have you and Mark for the holiday if you're willing." The offer surprised her, visible in the way her features softened. "That's very generous. I'll talk to Mark." After the call, Rachel collapsed onto the couch. "Your ex-wife is coming for Thanksgiving. What did we just agree to, family?" Carter sat beside her. "Complicated, messy, but family." September brought Sophie starting kindergarten, Maddie beginning first grade in Chicago, and wedding planning that quickly became more elaborate than either adult wanted. Rachel's mother was dead, Carter's parents retired in Arizona and uninterested in involvement. The wedding would be small, immediate family only. But where to have it became a debate. Rachel wanted something simple. Carter suggested the penthouse. Both felt wrong. The answer came mid-October when they drove past the diner where they'd first met. Rachel grabbed Carter's arm. "There. That's where we should get married. The diner, where else makes sense? That's where everything started." Mrs. Patterson, the owner, cried when they asked. She'd watched their story unfold through Carter's occasional visits, through conversations where he'd mentioned Rachel and Sophie with increasing frequency. "I'd be honored." She wiped her eyes with her apron. "Christmas Eve, full circle from when you met Christmas Eve." Carter looked at Rachel. 1 year exactly. The date was set, December 24th at 5 p.m. Immediate family only. Dinner after at the same tables where a billionaire had watched a mother count coins and decided to offer kindness. November arrived with Thanksgiving preparations that terrified Rachel more than she'd admit. Rebecca and Mark flying in, staying at a hotel but coming for dinner. Maddie visiting for the long weekend. Meeting the ex-wife while planning a wedding felt like emotional warfare. The day itself started tense. Rebecca arrived with Mark in tow, both of them polite but distant. Maddie bounced between homes, her energy trying to bridge gaps words couldn't. Sophie broke the ice accidentally, bringing Rebecca a drawing she'd made of all of them as stick figures. "Your family is big now. Look, there's Maddie and Daddy and Mommy Ray and you and Mark." Rebecca studied the drawing, something in her expression shifting. "You made this for me?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "So you can remember we're all family even when we're far away." "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very thoughtful." Rebecca's voice was thick. "I'll put it on my fridge." Dinner was actually pleasant conversation, flowing more easily as wine softened edges. Mark turned out to be genuinely kind, his stories about Maddie's adventures in Chicago making everyone laugh. Rebecca relaxed enough to mention that Carter seemed happier than she'd seen him during their entire marriage. "Rachel makes me better." Carter's hand found Rachel's under the table. "Helps me remember what actually matters." Rebecca's smile was sad but sincere. "I'm glad you found that. We never had it, you and I." "No, but we made something good anyway." Carter looked at Maddie, who was showing Sophie how to make a turkey drawing using her handprint. "We made her." The weekend ended with Rebecca pulling Rachel aside before leaving for the airport. "Take care of him. Not because he needs saving, but because he needs someone to witness him trying." Rachel nodded, understanding the blessing being offered. "Take care of Maddie. We'll take care of her when she's here. Deal." December arrived with cold that made summer feel impossible to believe had happened. The wedding was 3 weeks away, then 2, then 1. Details finalized themselves through a blur of decisions neither adult cared much about. The important parts were settled, both girls in matching red velvet dresses, simple vows they'd written together, rings that meant something beyond expense. Christmas Eve arrived, clear and bright, temperature hovering just above freezing. The diner was closed to regular customers, Mrs. Patterson having decorated with white lights and poinsettias. 20 chairs for the 20 guests they'd invited, Brennan and his family, Maggie crying before the ceremony even started, Rebecca and Mark Maddie between them. Hospital colleagues who'd become Rachel's friends. Carter stood at the front in a dark suit that cost more than Rachel's first car but looked appropriate rather than ostentatious. Brennan beside him as best man, grinning like he'd personally arranged the whole thing. Music started, something simple played through speakers Mrs. Patterson had borrowed from her grandson. Maddie and Sophie appeared at the diner's entrance holding hands, their red dresses bright against December gray visible through window. They walked down the makeshift aisle together, both girls grinning, dropping rose petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. When they reached the front, they split, Maddie going to Rebecca and Mark, Sophie climbing into Maggie's lap. Then Rachel appeared. She wore cream instead of white, a simple dress that made her look timeless rather than trendy. Her hair was down, minimal makeup, no veil. She'd walked into this diner a year ago counting coins with desperate hope. She walked toward Carter now with certainty that transformed everything. Carter's vision blurred, but he didn't care who saw him cry. This woman, this incredible survivor, was choosing him, trusting him with her heart and her daughter despite every reason past experience gave her to run. They met at the front, Rachel's hands finding his, both of them shaking slightly. Dearly beloved. The officiant was Rachel's friend from nursing school, licensed online specifically for this ceremony. We gather to witness Carter and Rachel choose each other, not in ignorance of challenges, but with full awareness that love is work worth doing. The vows came from index cards both had labored over for weeks. Carter went first, his voice steady despite emotion threatening to choke him. Rachel, 1 year ago I was empty, convinced I had everything because I had money. You showed me I had nothing that mattered. You taught me that love isn't about saving or fixing, it's about showing up, being present, choosing someone every day, not because you need them, but because you want them. I promise to show up for you every day, in big moments and small ones, when you're strong and when you need strength. I promise to be your partner, not your provider, your equal, not your savior, your love forever. Rachel's turn, her voice thick but clear. Carter, 1 year ago I was drowning, working myself to death, barely surviving, convinced I had to do everything alone because depending on people was how you got hurt. You taught me that letting someone in isn't weakness, that accepting help isn't failure, that love grows instead of dividing when you're brave enough to trust it. I promise to walk beside you through good times and hard ones. I promise to communicate instead of assuming, to ask instead of demanding, to love you as you are, not who I need you to be, forever. The rings were simple platinum bands. Carter's hands shook, sliding Rachel's onto her finger. Hers were steady, placing his, by the power vested in me by the internet and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The officiant's smile was genuine. I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss. The kiss was soft and certain, applause erupting around them, both girls squealing with excitement. When they broke apart, Rachel was crying, Carter was crying, half the guests were crying. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, both girls immediately attaching themselves, one on each side. The photographer captured the moment, 2 adults, 2 children, all of them grinning despite tears. Dinner was chaos in the best way. Mrs. Patterson had catered the food, simple but perfect. Sophie and Maddie ran between tables, high on sugar and excitement. Brennan gave a toast that made everyone laugh, and Maggie gave another that was mostly sobbing but heartfelt. Rebecca surprised everyone by standing, glass raised. I married Carter first. I thought I knew him, understood what our life would be. But I was wrong. We weren't right together. She looked at Rachel. You are. You bring out parts of him I never saw. You make him better. Thank you for that. And thank you for loving my daughter like your own. Rachel stood, crossing to Rebecca, hugging her with genuine affection that surprised them both. Thank you for sharing her with us, for trusting us with her. That means everything. As evening darkened the sky outside, Carter stood to make the announcement he and Rachel had planned. We wanted to start a tradition tonight. Every Christmas Eve from now on, we come back to this diner. He gestured around the room. And we find someone who needs dinner, someone counting coins, someone struggling, and we pay it forward. The guests murmured approval. Mrs. Patterson produced a box donations from everyone present to fund future Christmas Eve dinners for families in need. But we can start tonight. Rachel's voice joined his. There's a family in the parking lot, mother with 2 children. We saw them when we arrived. Carter and Rachel walked to the door together, stepped into December cold. Across the parking lot, a woman sat in an old sedan with 2 kids visible in the back seat. She was counting something in her lap, the dome light revealing her face. They approached slowly, Carter knocking gently on the window. The woman looked up, startled and suspicious. He smiled unthreatening. We just got married in there. He gestured toward the diner. And we'd love it if you and your children would join us for dinner. Our treat. No strings. The woman's face cycled through disbelief, hope, suspicion, exhaustion. I don't have money for no money needed. Rachel's voice was gentle. Just company. It's Christmas Eve. Nobody should eat alone on Christmas. The mother's eyes filled with tears. Her children were watching from the backseat, faces pressed to windows. She looked at them, at her empty hands, at Carter and Rachel standing in the cold. Okay, her whisper was broken. Thank you. They led the family inside into warmth and light and community. Sophie and Maddie immediately adopted the new children, showing them the dessert table. The mother sat at a table looking overwhelmed, crying quietly while Mrs. Patterson brought her food she didn't have to count coins for. Carter pulled Rachel close, watching the scene unfold. This was it, this moment where everything came full circle, where the billionaire who'd been empty and the mother who'd been desperate created something bigger than themselves. Later, much later, after guests had left and the new family had gone home with full stomachs and Mrs. Patterson's promise of more help to come, Carter and Rachel stood alone in the diner where everything had started. 1 year ago, I sat at that table, Carter pointed to the corner booth, alone, convinced money was all that mattered. 1 year ago, I stood at that counter. Rachel's voice was soft, counting $8.47, hoping it would be enough. They looked at each other, this man and woman who'd found each other through coincidence and kindness and the courage to try again after being broken. Ready to go home. Mrs. Reynolds, Rachel's smile was radiant. Ready to go home. Mr. Reynolds. They drove through Boston streets that sparkled with Christmas lights. Both girls asleep in the back seat despite promises they'd stay awake to see everything. The penthouse waited, no longer empty, filled now with evidence of family. Toys scattered across the floor, drawings covering the fridge, small shoes by the door, chaos and noise and everything that mattered. Carter carried Maddie upstairs, Rachel carried Sophie. They tucked both girls into their beds, Maddie's room and Sophie's, the doors left open between them. In their own room, Carter pulled Rachel close, breathing in the scent of her hair. Best Christmas ever, second best. Rachel smiled against his shoulder. Last year was first. That's when I found you. We found each other. They stood at the windows overlooking the city lights spreading below them like grounded stars, holding each other while snow began to fall. Somewhere in Chicago, Rebecca was putting Maddie's drawing on the fridge, making space in her life for this new configuration of family. Somewhere in the city, a mother was feeding her children with food she hadn't had to count coins for, kindness rippling outward from a choice made a year ago. And here, 27 floors above Boston, 2 people who'd been broken found themselves whole. Not because anyone had saved them, but because they'd chosen each other. Every day, through fear and mistakes and the messy work of building something that lasted. Money couldn't buy happiness. Carter had learned that the hard way, but kindness, presence, showing up, choosing love over fear. Those things built something money never could. Tomorrow they'd wake up to wrapping paper chaos and breakfast burned by enthusiastic children. They'd FaceTime Maddie to include her in the morning. They'd navigate the beautiful disaster of blended family and imperfect love. But tonight was perfect. Tonight was enough. Tonight was everything. The snow fell heavier, covering the city in white. Inside, a family slept. 2 girls dreaming of sisters and presents and forever. 2 adults holding each other, believing in second chances and small moments and love. that multiplied instead of divided. The story that started with coins and kindness ended with vows and family. But really, it was just beginning. Every day a new choice, every moment an opportunity to show up. Every Christmas Eve a chance to pay forward the grace that had saved them both. Carter kissed Rachel's forehead, felt her smile against his chest, and knew with absolute certainty that he'd spend the rest of his life grateful for the night he'd watched a stranger count coins and decided to offer dinner instead of walking away. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone in. Sometimes the strongest thing is accepting help. Sometimes the richest you can be has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the people who choose to stay. Merry Christmas to the family we found. Merry Christmas to the love we built. Merry Christmas to second chances and small moments and kindness that changes everything. Merry Christmas to going home.